Every 3 years, I run a month-long summer course in Bali for about 12 to 15 students from Gettysburg College who travel with me to Indonesia to experience what it is like to be taught music by instructors whose primary language is not English. Participants observe how teachers and learners in a cross-cultural context negotiate cultural identities and language while working with people outside their own culture. Students are asked to reflect upon their learning processes, to consider what resources they needed to draw upon to be successful, and to consider some of the difficulties faced by language learners. The course is conducted in 3 different settings in Bali, Indonesia. The first is at the Inasindhu Beach Hotel and Resort in the capital city of Denpasar. During the first week there, participants attend the Bali Arts Festival and observe professional Balinese musicians, dancers, and artists perform. After a few days at the festival, participants travel to central Bali to live in homestays and to rehearse gamelan and dance and in facilities for learning Balinese musical arts near Ubud. In central Bali, participants embark on a rigorous 10-day schedule filled with class discussions about culture, immigration, and school policy, and explore theories on learning different types of language. They become familiar with the musical technique and styles of 2 different types of gamelan ensembles and learn how to dance in traditional Balinese styles. Students are in rehearsals for about 6 hours a day. Occasional excursions are taken to cultural sites, and students are exposed to master shadow puppeteers, masked dancers, wood carvers, and ancient styles of gamelan. They witness daily life with their host families, learn to make offerings, go to market in the morning with the matriarch of the household, learn to cook meals and to teach English to, as well as learn Bahasa Bali and Bahasa Indonesia from children in their homestays. The third setting is located in the village of Banyarwani in Karambitan in West Bali. Banyarwani is not on the tourist path, and the members of the village are less accustomed to running into Westerners. In this setting, we rent the village gamelan Gang Kabiar for rehearsals. When we are not rehearsing, we visit and work in the elementary schools and conduct photo, voice, and ethnographic projects with adolescents in the village. Students are paired up with an adolescent in Banyarwani and go off for an entire day. The adolescents are given free rein to take our students anywhere and to show them what they do on a typical day and what they think is important and valuable to them in their village. The adolescents and the Gettysburg College students take photos of the things they think are important for describing daily life in Banyarwani, and they choose photos together and then work together to describe what is important about the place or space or cultural event for which they are capturing. And the trip ends with a culminating performance with nearly 800 people from the surrounding area communities. At this performance, our students, as well as the local gamelan ensemble, perform the pieces we have learned throughout the past month. We accompany dancers from the village and also dance to music performed by the local gamelan ensemble. A slideshow presentation accompanies some of the music we perform, showing the work of the learning exchange between Gettysburg College students and the adolescents of Banyarwani. And throughout the entire month-long trip, each of the college students is responsible for choosing a research topic. They capture soundscapes throughout the island related to this topic, and they then are responsible for submitting a 5 to 10 minute NPR-esque article that is aired on our campus radio station upon return, thus educating a broader audience about Balinese culture when we return to the Gettysburg community. Examples include the Balinese education system, the impact of globalization on the environment, gender roles on the island, Agama Hinduism and its practices on the island, and many other different types of projects exist too. So upon returning to Gettysburg, students curate an art gallery showcase of the photos and narratives created during their ethnographic fieldwork with the adolescents. And the show at the Adams County Arts Council in town lasts for about a month, and it invites various school children and citizens from the surrounding area to catch a glimpse of daily life in West Bali. Thus, what we experience in Bali, we reflect and showcase there with our collaborators, as well as bring back their stories and share them with our community. So each time I have run the trip, I have invited a student to conduct research with me on the trip itself. And in 2013, Alice Broadway and I explored how the participants' perceptions surrounding culture, language learning, and music changed over the duration of the course. To do this, we conducted semi-structured interviews with each participant at the beginning, middle, and end of the trip, and recorded audio and video of each of our rehearsals. In 2016, Alex Schweizer and I considered how the process of music transmission works within a cross-cultural music learning environment. Alex and I wanted to know how meaning is constructed when signs, symbols, and language used to mediate musical instruction are presented by individuals from different backgrounds and experiences. We then developed a conceptual model that provided explanation to the various participation structures present in the cross-cultural music context. And we considered what it might mean for future music teachers to use this conceptual model. In the study with Broadway, 3 main themes emerged through her interviews with members of the course. The first was that of expectations. With all participants, the idea of traveling to a country that does not natively speak English left them with the expectation that there would be a language barrier that would slow down the learning process. However, upon beginning gamelan instruction, participants discovered that their initial expectations were not representative of their actual experiences learning gamelan. This was because they found spoken language was not the main medium of communication in this environment, and that instead the teacher relied on gestures, singing, and music, and visual and oral cues to explain musical concepts. Although some students occasionally were frustrated by the lack of English and felt they wanted a verbal explanation, one participant said, quote, "I found in this particular context that language is both a huge help and a huge hindrance. As far as rehearsals were concerned, sometimes when things were explained to us, we were even more confused. But when they actually played it out, and then when we listened to it a few times and started feeling it, that uptake that occurred was probably the most vital learning tool for us." So even though there was an expectation that verbal explanation would better help them understand, this particular student discovered that the verbal explanations actually confused the meaning and got in the way of understanding the music. Another expectation that emerged through the interviews was when students were asked how they would bring back their new perspectives and apply them to learning in the United States. The majority of participants said that they did not think it was possible to do this. Although they acknowledged their perspectives had changed, there was an overwhelming feeling that in order for students to be able to implement those more flexible ideas of time, language, and culture that they had experienced, the entire society would also have to reshape and adopt these cultural views to make that possible. So as students discovered that their expectations did not align with their experiences, they found themselves in situations where they had to make adaptations in their learning. And this theme of adaptations came in the form of both personal adaptations of students as well as teacher accommodations. One student said, quote, "I started out thinking only about my part as an individual, but soon found that this didn't work in this context. I got very frustrated and tried to overthink everything." Another student said, quote, "It worked much better when I stopped thinking about it so much, and I could just let it go and just do it." Another student said, "I definitely look at the things that I'm doing here more holistically than I would in an American setting." So all 3 of these examples show how students begin shifting and adapting their learning processes throughout a trip like this. Initially, they had focused on their individual responsibilities of learning their part in the music and separated that from the learning process of the entire group. And after experiencing the holistic learning approach involved in gamelan, students began to view their parts as pieces of the whole and began to focus on the collaborative learning of the ensemble. For a little bit of context, an important participation structure in Bali is an approach to learning known as Maguru Panggul. Guru translates to mean teacher, and Panggul translates to mean mallet. Therefore, Maguru Panggul translates to literally mean the mallet is our teacher. As ethnomusicologist Michael Bakken explains, the central role of the mallet as a transmitter of musical information provides important clues concerning basic differences between Balinese and Western conceptions of what it means to teach music. The Balinese teacher functions as a modeler of ideal music. He conveys musical information to the student and orients the entire learning process. There is a consistent aim to present the musical whole without drawing undue attention to the parts of which it is composed. This holistic orientation fundamentally distinguishes the Balinese Maguru Panggul teaching method from analytical and intervention-oriented Western pedagogical approaches, especially those involving music notation. As Wayan Rachman, a Balinese man and one of our teachers in Bali, who also subsequently attended Gettysburg College in the late 1990s, explains to us, learning through this holistic approach is inherently social in nature. Quote, "So that means we spend a lot of time in the learning and teaching process because of the social aspects of it. You know, like in the West, you don't need to learn in a group setting as much. You do it more independently. By emphasizing socialization, you get to know the character of different individuals better. In order to create a good group in Bali, you need to spend a lot of time together because you need to understand your peers' feelings and their character. Once you reach that point, then the group can respond to a small cue given by the mallet, or somebody trying to pull the music back. We all feel this. So a constant interaction is going on there when you reach that certain level. And that's the climatic achievement, the essence and beauty of playing gamelan. So in Bali, when learning a new song, it is always introduced at the actual tempo of the song, and the learning involves a lot of repetition. Balinese performers know from growing up in this environment how many of these songs go and how the structure of the music is organized. As such, they are able to fill in the gaps as the patterns repeat over and over again. When we began our instruction in Bali, our Balinese teachers followed that teaching style because that was what was familiar to them. However, they began noticing that Western students who have learned in different ways soon became very frustrated at this approach. Members of the group felt like they were being left behind by the teacher. However, we began noticing that the teacher started to adapt his teaching style in order to accommodate the learning styles of the Western students. As one student noted in an interview with Alice Broadway, they said, quote, "I noticed that the teacher had to make some accommodations for us by slowing the song down for certain sections and going part by part," end quote. These examples of adaptations and accommodations show that in the learning environment, both teachers and students are making adaptations in order to create meaning. And through that, everyone is in turn both learning and teaching. This focus on group learning and the idea that all members of the environment are both teachers and students was most prevalent in our time in the village of Banyarwani. There we were learning side by side with Balinese villagers and witnessed the emphasis on community and the understanding that everyone has something to contribute and teach in the learning environment. One student said, quote, "Just by the virtue of the Balinese village gamelan players being on the instrument adjacent to us, those who were struggling on the trip got to see directly how to do it." Another student said, quote, "It was like being surrounded by teachers everywhere. Whenever you mess up anything, some player sitting next to you will show you how to do it." These experiences help students develop the perspective that all students coming to a learning environment with different cultural, linguistic, and musical resources that they are drawing off of in order to learn. And through that, everyone has strengths they can share with the group. As Broadway saw through her interviews, by adjusting expectations through personal adaptations and teacher accommodations, all participants expanded their views to focus on new approaches to learning, new approaches to teaching, and new approaches to musicking. And while the majority of participants had the expectation that these new perspectives would not apply in the cultural context of the United States specifically, a number of participants responded optimistically, embracing their new perspectives and eagerly awaiting to implement them in learning environments in the United States. One perspective teacher named Christina went on the trip in 2013, and as part of the course, she focused her ethnographic study on making offerings and understanding the religious importance of the offerings to the Balinese community. For Christina, making offerings became a natural part of the process behind playing gamelan, and she had embraced the beliefs and practices of the Balinese while in Bali and continued to implement her new views on culture and music upon returning to the United States. Before every rehearsal and performance, Christina made offerings to our gamelan. Reflecting on this process, Christina said, quote, "I wanted to understand the offering's significance. Once I did, it was almost impossible not to come back to the Gettysburg and make offerings to our gamelan. Whether or not you practice Hinduism as the Balinese do, what gamelan is and means to them within that context is overwhelmingly important. I could not come back to our gamelan in Gettysburg and not see it as a living thing like we did in Bali." Christina's experiences in Bali expanded her views on music and culture and changed her perspective on the learning environment surrounding gamelan. And through creating offerings for the gamelan, Christina was able to create a more inclusive learning environment in which she brought her experience and knowledge of Balinese religious and cultural practices to teach and share with the rest of the group. And at the end of the fall semester, when we returned from our summer trip, Christina performed an offering before our final performance in December. And everyone in the ensemble, regardless if they had been to Bali or not, said that after the concert that this experience just felt different to them. It was more like Bali. So what does all this mean? Using a pedagogy of outsideness, as we like to call it at Gettysburg, encourages people to be reflective practitioners. We saw this with Christina's experience, for example. Christina reflected on her experience as a Western student in a Balinese setting and developed an awareness of her own funds of knowledge in relation to others, and realized in all learning environments, every participant has something to offer us as both teacher and learner. In a pedagogy of outsideness, as Bakhtin would call it, we step outside our normal roles to acknowledge the perspectives and experiences of others. As Bakhtin says, quote, "I must put myself in his place and coincide with him, followed by a return into myself, for only from this place can the material derived be rendered meaningful." Christina reflected on her experience with the cultural and religious significance of making offerings to the gamelan. And during her last interview, Christina noted the following, quote, "I think lots of things that we've discovered in Bali have affected our way of thinking during the time we have lived here. And when we go back to the United States, it will feel weird. But I think that weirdness is pointing out the things we need to remember the most. And when you're sitting at home and something happens and you think, why do I feel so weird about this? Why am I missing Bali because of this? It's pointing out something that probably should change or that we might want to incorporate in our own lives. And I think that's how I'm going to try to bring things back with me." Christina learned that cultural practices cannot always be separated from certain kinds of music, and that there needs to be a space to honor those practices in the learning environment. As teachers, it is important to create that space in order to understand the culturally contextualized meaning in our musicking experiences. By placing ourselves outside our comfort zones and experiencing outsideness, teachers, 1, gain understanding of their students' perspectives and their views of the world. 2, understand how to shape learning environments to become more inclusive. 3, are able to disrupt musical practices that are perhaps authoritative. 4, are able to disrupt assimilation theories from language learning. And 5, co-create learning opportunities that honor multiple types of knowledge and ways of musicking. Through Alice Broadway's research, we understand that music teachers need learning opportunities in which they are placed in an environment where they are an other. This enables teachers to experience firsthand the difficulties that English language learners may face in their future classrooms. In our cross-cultural society, music teacher education programs need to center educational goals around teaching pre-service music teachers how to be flexible, how to be adaptable, how to reflect, how to critically think, and how to develop new ways of musicking that are culturally relevant and responsive to current students. In the case of Alex Schweizer's research in 2016, he learned that in many ensemble settings, individuals often become reliant on certain mediational means such as notation, or on a particular social actor that may prevent them from being able to music independently outside a particular musical space. Teachers can often establish norms of dependency in which students are accustomed to not having to work towards co-constructing meaning with the teachers and other participants in the room. One student on the trip in 2016 that Alex interviewed expressed this feeling in regards to his own playing, stating, quote, "I don't feel completely independent. Like, if everyone else went away and you just said, play this part, I could not do that. I would probably struggle to perform on my own without the others." End quote. Alex has been able to reflect on our learning experiences in Bali as well as bring our research into practice into his own teaching. So I asked Alex to speak to the ways in which he is applying what he has learned now that he's out in the field, and he provided this photo from his first year of teaching and, in his words, said, quote, "In this photo, I am showing some sort of conducting gesture that I thought might grow the phrase. It got me to thinking about how we teach people to know what we intend when we use that gesture. Take a look at the student in the back row scratching his head. He's obviously not on board with what I'm trying to intend by that gesture. By reflecting on my own teaching practices, I have found myself frequently asking, how can I be as clear as possible in communicating my goals, expectations, and provide feedback to my students? I am also keenly aware of the various participation structures that exist within my classroom at any given time. I ultimately seek to employ an interdependent structure of participation for the ensemble. For those moments when all of us are musicking together and responding to everyone else's ideas, but I am often aware when I lean too heavily on a teacher-dependent structure of participation, as might be the case in this photo. And I am supportive of a codependent structure of participation where students can work together to interpret the discursive practices I am utilizing in order to reach the end goal of mutually understood mediational means. This is something I learned by critically reflecting on the learning we did in Bali. I recognize that at times I am leading a rehearsal through direct acculturation, and at other times I recognize that in order for students to be successful, I might need to employ analytics teaching strategies to suspend some of my advanced theory or music history knowledge in order to put something in terms that will make sense to someone unfamiliar with a musical practice. Ultimately, though, our trip and research provided me an opportunity to experience and examine what it is like to be an other in a music learning environment. Being a learner in Bali taught me how to empathize with students who are unfamiliar with the discursive practices and participation structures at play in my current teaching context. This has made me a much better teacher overall. Though there were many advantages to exploring the process of meaning-making in the cross-cultural music context of Bali, Indonesia, both studies I did with Broadway and Schweizer point out that one does not need to leave the country to engage in a pedagogy of outsideness. as we would like to charge that all learning environments are cross-cultural in nature and employ many different types of discourses and participation structures. However, by learning in a vastly different cultural environment than our own, we were faced with examining our own ignorance at times. We were also confronted by the privileges we carry and the many power dynamics inherent by our presence as Westerners, begging a larger question that I hope to explore in more depth in future iterations of this course. Who are the beneficiaries of international educational exchanges? I'm faced with lots of different questions about our presence and what we do when we go to these places. Who's benefiting? Often we come into these places trying to create a different type of an exchange for students and hope for the best in that exchange from both parties, the people who are coming into the space and the people who are we're interacting with. But often I'm left wondering how this is all going to play out. Is the benefit to us, the learner, in this new space, or is the benefit to others from our presence there? The questions are complex, there are no real answers to it, but we try our very best to ethically provide a structure that allows us to see ourselves and to see each other, and as Bakhtin says, in the realm of culture, outsideness is the most powerful factor in understanding. It is only in the eyes of another culture that foreign culture reveals itself fully and profoundly. A meaning only reveals its depths once it has encountered and come into contact with another foreign meaning. They engage in a kind of dialogue which surmounts the closedness and one-sidedness of these particular meanings, these cultures. We raise new questions for a foreign culture, ones that did not raise for itself. We seek answers to our own questions in it, and the foreign culture responds to us by revealing to us its new aspects and new semantic depths. So I take this idea to understand our interactions. They're never unidirectional, they're very complex, and they provide lots of different entry points. And it is our responsibility to be mindful about how we enter those spaces and the ways that we are going to interact and what we can learn from one another.